Thank you all. Thank you all. Thank you. Well, thank you. Now, Abby Blunt's leaving. She's heard this speech before. I've got, at least she believes she might have. Thank you. I mean, I was sitting there thinking, how could I possibly assemble a room that had more people in it that did more to see that I won this Senate race? And that's exactly what happened. All of you did all you could do. Well, almost all of you did all you could do, but it was a great effort, and I am grateful to you. The most important person in that effort, of course, was Abby Blunt. Abby, wave back there, the back door. Abby Blunt. And there's Charlie Blunt. Charlie, can you raise your hand, buddy? There's Charlie, and I think that's maybe as much of this as Charlie can stand. But it was a critically important year, and to see the candidates that we had out there working as they were, you know, our first-time candidates, Billy Long, and Vicki Hartzler, and Ed Martin, to see the campaign team we put together, our campaign chairman, Ann Wagner, Sarah Steelman, who was in charge of our small business effort. We talked about jobs all the time because people were talking about jobs all the time. You know, as the campaign started, I thought, well, I've never seen anything like the level of engagement of the issues of a campaign. And then I thought, well, why wouldn't you have this level of engagement? This campaign is not like your family's trying to figure out what their position is on the defensive missile shield. This is about their jobs and their health care and their utility bill and their taxes, and they knew it. It was also about the kind of country we were going to be, and they knew that as well. So when I got a chance to speak to the Missouri General Assembly, the House of Representatives, the other day, I stood there at that podium, and I'd done that a few times before when I was Secretary of State. One of the jobs is to organize the House. But when I was doing that before, all the Republicans were kind of shoved over here to one side on the left edge of the room. And I look up there and I'm looking down the middle aisle and I see all these Republicans I recognize totally on the right side of the middle aisle. And then I see about half of the left side of the middle aisle also has all those Republicans on it. And it was a great sight. It was a great sight. It was a great thing to look at. Because those were going to be the people that determined the future of our state. And frankly, those were also the people that did a lot to see that I won this Senate race and we won these House races. And I told our friends in the House and the Senate both 2 years ago, I said, look, I think they're going to overreach. I believe we'll be able to do this. I'm not doing it because I just want the exercise of being in every county in the state. But something that nobody but you and I really understand, I told our legislative friends, is a bunch of you are leaving. And the person that's running the first time is going to be a whole lot more energized than the person that just got reelected the third time. And I said, part of why I'm running is I'm going to do everything I can to help you, but I believe you're going to be doing everything you can possibly do that's going to wind up helping me. And we all developed that sense that this is about the future. And Tom Swipe came in and won that statewide race. Pretty hard to, Kit Bond, by the way, was the last person to beat a down-ticket state official, and he did pretty well. And Tom is going to do well too. But it's a critical moment of deciding who we're going to be and how we get back to common sense. We're spending way more money than we can afford to spend. And I was so proud of Billy, and I was so proud of Vicki and all the freshmen in the House when the other day they told their leaders, the cuts you're proposing just not good enough. We told everybody the first thing we were going to do was cut $100 billion in spending. And that's what we want to cut. We don't want to cut half of that. We want to cut all that. And when you hear this $60 billion number, that is the number, but it's the number for 7/12 of the budget. So if you calculate that over a year's time, they're cutting annual spending by the $100 billion they said they were going to cut annual spending, and it is just the start. I had some reporter call me today and say, well, what about this $60 billion? And I said, it's just the door opener. We spent $3.7 trillion, we thought, a month ago. That's what the administration said we were going to spend. And then they came back a month later and they said, oh, wait, it was actually $3.8 trillion. But you know how many dollars we collected at the federal level? 2.2. Now, you can't spend $3.8 trillion and collect $2.2 trillion and expect for that to last. You can do that if you want to be Greece. You can do that if you want to be Ireland. You can do that if you want to be Portugal. But you can't do that if you want to be the United States of America. And what we're deciding is who we're going to be. And what we're deciding is, are we going to make common sense decisions? You know, we watch the things happening in the Middle East right now. We see the social media is so powerful. We try to use it in so many of our campaigns in this room, and we used it in our campaign. In fact, when I took my cards down, sent my business cards down the other day, about a month ago, 2 months ago, to have them. They don't have an office on them yet because I don't really have a permanent office, unlike Billy and Vicki and Todd and everybody else that I know. I just have a temporary office with no windows. But I'm not complaining. Don't make that sound like I'm complaining. But anyway, I don't have an office number to put on. But they came back, and the person that took the card and the other things were getting printed said, well, you're the first member of the Senate in the history of the Senate to put your Facebook page and your Twitter page on your business card. Because we want to talk to people the way they want to talk to us. And we want to keep people involved in this conversation. And clearly what we see happening in the Middle East is the technology has overcome the tyrants. There was a time when what you tried to do was control the radio station and the TV station and the telephone station, and believe me, those were the first three things you secured if there was any uprising against you. You put the tanks around those three things quickly, and then nobody could find out what was going on. But we are beyond that time, and we are for freedom. And you should look back sometime at George Bush's second inaugural address, because just like in the past few weeks there's been like a tone deafness about what was going on, George Bush in the second inaugural had a real sense of what was going on when he said something like the people all over the world have an innate desire for freedom, and the United States of America will always be on the side of freedom. And whether it's some tyrant like this guy Muammar Gaddafi, who's been crazy his whole life and is now killing his own people, we need to stand up strong and tall on behalf of freedom. And we need to hope that we're doing and we need to hope that our country is doing everything we can to see that what emerges out of that is not some radical religious element that takes over the country, but true democracy and true freedom, where people can make choices and have choices and live not like a few people say they should live, but like they hope to live in their hopes and dreams. And how many times are we going to have to see this movie about the gas pumps? You know, 20-cent increase, and we cannot continue to be dependent on people who don't like us. You know, we need to be doing everything we can. We need to be doing everything we can for more American energy of all kinds. I mean, what's the number one question? The number one question out there in the country today is, where are the private sector jobs? And the president at the State of the Union message can spend all the time he wants talking about how we need to be competitive in 25 years. But that's not what people are concerned about. They're concerned about, are we going to have jobs in 25 days? And what are we doing to create those private sector jobs? And for at least 4 decades, we've used more energy than we could produce. So if you want to go to a place that has a guaranteed marketplace, go there. Create more American energy. Create more jobs. Don't be dependent on other economies, and particularly don't be dependent on people who don't like you. It doesn't make sense. We need to see common sense things happen in the country. Get this spending under control. We spend $3.8 trillion. Now that's for 3 years straight now. So that's added, you know, and nobody in this room, including me, knows how much money that is. And the Secretary of the Treasury doesn't know how much money that is. The President of the United States doesn't know how much money that is. And it's the most dangerous thing in terms of our future I can think of who we're going to be, because we're not as scared about this as we should be. You know, if I stood up here and said something's going to cost $300,000 or $3 million, you'd immediately be able to connect, and I would too, with whether or not that's even remotely in the realm of possibility. But if I say something costs $300 billion or $1 trillion, nothing different happens in your mind. And $1 trillion is a whole lot more than $300 billion. And $300 billion is a whole lot more than we used to have an annual. We never had deficits at that level. But now we do. And so far beyond that, that the monthly rounding error was $120 billion. How could you be off $120 billion from one month to the next? That's how much money we're spending. 3.8 spending, 2.2 collecting, and you're not going to make this up on the collecting side if you hope to have the kind of economy that all of us want to have. You've got to make it up on the spending side, which means you've got to make the tough choices. And you've got to figure out what ought to happen in Washington, D.C., and what ought to happen in Jefferson City, and what ought to happen at the local school board, and not trying to be doing all of those things all three places. Now, let's get government back in the place where government needs to be. And whatever we've decided that government should do, let's decide that does it well. You know, Abraham Lincoln at Cooper's Union, in the only speech he made outside of Illinois in 1860, trying to explain this new Republican Party, said, as he talked about his vision for his party, he said, government should do for people only those things that people cannot better do for themselves. And there are a few of those, but there aren't a lot of those. And we ought to figure out what those are, and we ought to do them as well as we can possibly do them. And you know, Todd Aiken is a senior member on the Armed Services Committee, and Vicki Hartzler's on that committee, and clearly defending the country is one of those things. But even that, we need to do in the way that makes the most sense for the future. Everything we have to look at more carefully than we've looked at things before. This cannot continue. If this continues, we will not be who we are. We'll just be like everybody else. And if you were at any of my campaign events after late in the year, you heard me say I was having coffee and a piece of pie at the outside the restaurant right across the street from the Iron County Courthouse with my coordinator down there, Tony Harbison, who's Farm Bureau president, farmer, but basically he's a tree trimmer. And Tony Harbison told me as we were sitting there having coffee, he's talking about his business. He said, you know, whenever I leave somebody's yard, I like it to look like nobody's been there except the trees look better. So we pick up every twig, we pick up every limb. If there's a rut in the yard, we roll the rut in the yard. And he said, my boys have had to work for me all their life. Now, you know, my mom and dad were dairy farmers, so I understand involuntary servitude. This was not, I got that. And he said, over and over again over the years, they'd say to me, well, Dad, nobody else does it this way. And he said, every time they said, nobody else does it this way, I said, if you do it like everybody else does it, you're just everybody else. Now, the current crowd in charge of the Senate and the White House, and until recently the House, really wanted us to be just kind of like everybody else. And that's the choice. Do you want to be everybody else, or do you want to be the United States of America? I'm opting for the United States of America. So, as I watched Wisconsin every day this week, I thought about Matt Blunt. And I called him about the middle of the week, and I said, when you see all those people rioting in the Capitol, does that remind you of anything? And he said, yeah, anytime I see people chain themselves to somebody's door, I think about being governor. And of course, we did great and important things when Matt Blunt was governor. But the guy standing right beside him was as great a partner as you could possibly have, as dependable a friend as you could possibly have. And the chief spear catcher, not an easy job, by the way, the chief spear catcher in that administration was the lieutenant governor. The guy you could rely on to be there and explain and work hard to explain why these things had to be done. You know, Missourians, by the way, now understand why they had to be done. We just did them about 6 years earlier than anybody else did them. And thank God for those of you who were in the General Assembly at the time that did what had to be done. But Peter Kendra came to the lieutenant governor's office better prepared for that office and for leadership in state government than anybody I know of. He understood the legislative process. He understood the pitfalls and the opportunities of state government. He came well prepared, and he came to work. And somehow, he managed to be the only Republican elected in one of the most difficult years we ever saw in 2008, as he was reelected as our lieutenant governor. And I'm proud to introduce him tonight as he stands before you and stands with me as our lieutenant governor, and I believe the guy who can be the next governor of Missouri, Peter Kendra.
Thank you.